All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. BrightBuilt is very pleased to be hosting both Ryan McCackern and Joe Carey, builder partners who work with us to bring the BrightBuilt homes that we design to life. We are holding this webinar today in response to just the general building climate right now, and the fact that we are fielding a lot of questions from prospective homeowners who want to understand how to prepare for what they're hearing in the news, what they're seeing in terms of rising costs, and how to strategize around getting to a finished result, getting to a final home that's going to suit your needs and still be able to fall within your budgetary parameters. So I'm going to start with a quick round of introductions and give each of us a chance to share who we are and with whom we work, and then we're going to launch into a brief few moments of just anecdotes or insights shared from both Ryan and Joe, and then we'll go ahead and get into questions. I'm going to primarily be working from the questions that were submitted as part of the RSVP form. Both Jay and myself will be alternating back and forth posing those questions. But to those who are in the audience today, you may also submit questions through the Q&A form in the bottom right-hand part of your Zoom window. You can find a button there that says Q&A. If you click on that button, that'll bring up a window and you can pose questions to us live as well. And we will be weaving those questions into the dialogue as we proceed. But it's just going to be a very informal conversation and mostly an opportunity to address outstanding questions that folks have as they enter into the process of building a new home. So thank you again. My name is Parlin. I'm the director with BrightBuilt Home. I've been with BrightBuilt Home for 9 years now, since the outset and creation of the firm, and really pleased to have everyone here today. I'm going to hand it to Jay next, and then we'll go to Joe Carey after Jay.
Hi guys, I'm Jay Sandifer, everyone sales here at BrightBuilt Home. Likely I'm the first person you'll talk to if you call or write in. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about what Ryan and Joe have to say here. Joe?
Hi everybody, my name is Joe Carey. My company is Decumana Screen Design Build. We are located in Western Massachusetts. I've been in business for a little over 20 years. And its business has changed quite a lot over those years. I started as a cabinet maker in New York City, moved to Western Massachusetts and started to do more additions, and then got very involved in the whole sustainable building culture. And increasingly that is what we're doing, is really just focusing on so-called net zero new homes and significant sized additions. That's it, Ryan.
Hello, my name is Ryan McCackern. I'm the owner of Maker Construction. We are located out of Hebron, Maine, but we, depending on what side of the business I talk about, we cover at least the build territory from just about the sea coast straight east of Hebron into the Greenwood area. So it's about a 2-hour radius is kind of the area that we cover. Predominantly our business right now is focused on BrightBuilt's full builds, and we do kind of have a portion. In fact, we've fairly recently set a house for Joe, but we do a lot of or have done a lot of set work also, in addition to just the GC work. So yeah, I think maybe similar to Joe, I'd say that the last certainly 10 years I've been kind of a little bit all over the map trying to figure out what avenue we're heading down as far as work goes. But right now, like I said, we're focused mainly on the GC work. So with BrightBuilt, all with BrightBuilt right now. So.
Great, thank you both. Now I will go ahead and circle back and just give each of you an opportunity to maybe share some insights and some things you've been seeing in the industry of late, both pre-COVID and current, and just general trends or thoughts you have to share. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Joe, and then move to Ryan again. Thank you.
The most significant impact I have felt has been, well, there are two that they're vying for the difficulty they're causing. I think everyone's very aware of the material cost escalations that have just been skyrocketing up, but also very volatile. So it's just that is always a challenge. Volatile, escalating, and interrupted in terms of availability. And the havoc that creates for scheduling and everything is just, there's a whole domino effect. You know, I kind of tell people, 30% of my time is just working on scheduling and rearranging scheduling. And that's, you know, I've never seen anything like it. The second really significant factor is the labor issue. There just isn't the labor out there to do the work that needs doing. And that has, you know, both driven off costs and slowed projects down, and, you know, just created a whole number of difficulties at this time when demand, I've never seen demand like this. So it's a perfect storm of challenges. In my region, my sense is, in talking to other builders in a wider region, Western Massachusetts, the issue is particularly acute, especially on the labor front. It's one of the big reasons that I am really turning towards companies like BrightBuilt that do the modular mode of delivery, because, you know, so much of the labor is done elsewhere where it's available. There's, you know, I think there's both cost effectiveness there and just pure possibility with the offsite construction stuff. This isn't really part of the economic question, but I just want to give a little plug to the BrightBuilt product, and also to my colleague Ryan. I just did a really final blower door test at a BrightBuilt house that we finished, that Ryan's crew put together, and we got a 0.51 air change per hour on the blower door. So for those of you, that means something. That's better than passive house standard. So I was really, really excited to see that, and wanted to kind of congratulate someone in person, the folks at BrightBuilt and Ryan and his crew for achieving that. So it's impressive. So Ryan?
That's great stuff, Joe. I obviously it's a much more of a testament to your folks on site that close stuff up, but that's really good stuff. I would echo easily what Joe just said on the two fronts. Obviously, material costs. Everybody kind of sees that directly in front of them. What's been interesting about the last 2 years, as far as materials go, not necessarily just the cost, but it has been all over the place as far as what materials are available, and then all of a sudden materials become available that weren't, and then all of a sudden it's a whole other end of the spectrum. It goes from electrical conduit to lumber to whatever. So it's just really been all over the place as far as availability goes. You know, cost obviously is a very important part of the equation, but scheduling is has been the single most difficult thing to accomplish right now. And secondly, like Joe said, the labor. If anybody can explain the labor shortage to me, I'd love to hear that explanation. But it has been there's a few trades like in our neck of the woods. Joe, I don't know if it's like this down there, but well drilling. In the past, in any scenario, I've been able to get a well company available within 2 weeks. Period. I've never seen it beyond 2 weeks. And right now, average, I've got a build that I'm looking at for next spring right now. And that well company said they are 26 weeks out. Absolutely no question. So they basically said, submit your application to get yourself in position right now. And if you have to cancel, you have to cancel. But I mean, that is just, it's mind blowing to me that that's a scenario, but that's the type of scheduling that we've been dealing with. You know, some of the trades, and again, it seems to be fairly inconsistent. The well situation's been pretty consistent for us, but you know, we go through, it's been fairly easy to get an electrical trade, but not the plumbing trade. So it's just been, it's been challenging because of its inconsistency, I think, more than anything. You know, if I knew every job from now till 5 years from now, I had to schedule a well driller 26 weeks out, then, you know, at least you could plan around that to some degree, but it's just been very inconsistent.
Yeah, great. Thank you both.
covered.
Those are really good insights and really solid place to start with the questions. One of the things I wanted to note, you know, just in response to both of those points is just the importance of preparation on the client side of things as well, and the understanding of the necessity for planning far in advance. So I'm also hearing from a lot of clients about shortages of appliances and even furnishings. And so really beginning that process early on will stand you in good stead for the timing of when the house is delivered, to be able to actually have those products available and delivered and, you know, in your home when you're ready to move into it. So, you know, just as Ryan is saying how he needs to be able to anticipate some of these things that are coming up, as hard as they are to anticipate because it's a moving target, but knowing now that he needs that 26 week lead time, he needs to schedule that now. So it's extending across all aspects of the industry. And so as far in the spirit of, you know, strategizing and preparing and understanding the full scope of what it takes to build right now, that's one takeaway, I think, from this conversation of the importance of planning ahead, the importance of making decisions early, the importance of anticipating delays and building out the overall timeline that you imagine building a home within. Just allowing, you know, padding out that timeline that you might have in mind by some extra months, just in anticipation of some of these lead times. So again, I welcome anyone adding anything to the Q&A, the live Q&A box in Zoom. There's nothing yet, which is fine. We're going to go ahead and jump into the questions that were posed prior to the meeting. I'll start with a question from Katie. Katie, you asked about, can you talk about costs in relation to different levels or different levels of completion of building from shell to turnkey? So that might be a challenge because I know it's a way in which most of us don't do the math, but I'm going to pose the question because it was asked and see if either Joe or Ryan have even a broad sense of what that might look like. So we'll break it down to just shell versus fully completed, all in finished project. Where could you see that delta?
I obviously I can only speak in a scenario for ourselves. So I don't know what you guys do as far as a business goes, if you do full or partial scenarios. Obviously, you know, a homeowner, one of the places a homeowner can save money is to handle some of their own work, which as a business I'm fine with. I think in general that's where you're going to pull a lot of the cost out, is you're going to pull a lot of the labor cost out, you know, or not doing. I'm jumping ahead on this statement, but not doing a lot of the things that you might want to do as your full build out. And doing that stuff as DIY projects later on, or, you know, so we certainly, I don't know what scenarios I could highlight, but we certainly do and are willing to discuss leaving out portions of the work for the homeowner to finish out. So like I said, I don't want to speak for Joe, because some companies, they want to do the full project, and that's fine. But we're willing to have that discussion, certainly. I think a lot of the cases, maybe leaving out flooring, cabinet install, that kind of stuff. Those tend to be big ticket labor costs. They're not the lower end labor costs. So
Yeah, I would echo much of that. I mean, we also allow clients to get involved, and that can be a significant savings. It can get dicey, and if it's something you're considering, it's a conversation you want to have very early on with your builder. What I have found works is when it's a very discrete part of the job, preferably once we're gone. So some of the finishes, they can even get to the point of C of O. We throw up temporary railings, whatever, so they can occupy the house. And they do things like side, either exterior finishes or interior finishes, which is a significant part of the work. And what is much more challenging is to have a homeowner do stuff at the beginning, because then if something goes wrong, who was that on? I mean, that just can create some really, really difficult dynamics and conversations. And same too during it. There's insurance issues. There's scheduling complications, and that can make it far more difficult.
very good point, Joe.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, and I would just add a couple things. One, Joe made reference to this when he talked about the certificate of occupancy. That's one area in which we would need to ensure, to whatever degree the project is scaled back, for the owner to take from there. There's a clear line in the sand as to how and when the certificate of occupancy is going to be sought out, and that the contractor, there's very clear understanding and language around where the contractor is leaving off and where the homeowner is picking up, particularly if it's going to happen before that certificate of occupancy. It's most successful, I think, when it happens after, as Joe said. So you get to a very clear, substantial completion of the livable space or the plumbing requirements and any of the other code related requirements for the home. And then the other thing I would add that we hear from other general contractors too, who are, by and large, I would say most general contractors, at least with whom we work, are open to that scenario where they're happy to scale back certain pieces of the project to allow the homeowners to take that on themselves. But one area in which I do hear from more than one contractor is in plumbing fixtures, that it can be very alluring and tempting to be buying sinks and tubs and faucets off of faucets.com or any of the online venues. And it can still be possible to do that, but it's important to note that often when you do that, you may see a good savings on the unit itself, but some plumbers don't like to install those units themselves because they don't get to have their own warranty applied. And so there's nuance to when you scale back certain aspects of the project. So it is, as Joe said, it's an important conversation to have early and to really clearly establish the boundaries of the project. Specifically to Katie's question on cost, I would also just say it really, just like the cost of the build, it really depends on what is being scaled back and what actually a shell is. A completely stripped back shell, at least from BrightBuilt, versus a fully completed home, notwithstanding porches, garages, and all the other kind of exterior elements. I don't know, what would you guys say? My guess would be something in the realm of anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 for a typical 2,000 square foot home. If you were going from sheetrock with no fixtures, no bath fixtures, no nothing, to completion, that maybe it's a delta of roughly that scale. But it's also a point, at least when you're talking modular, where if you're stripping the finishes back to that degree and delivering a shell, you're really removing a lot of the cost effectiveness of the modular approach. Certainly feature elements in the bathroom or tile or stone counters, all of those things are very standard in our homes, and that is done on site. But once you start to strip more and more away, you lose that value of the offsite build. Okay, so Katie, I hope we answered your question. And a live question did come in. I think we'll go ahead and answer it since it's the only live question at the moment. And I don't know to what extent we can answer it. And this might actually be something that would be best addressed on a separate call with Jay, so we can understand more of the context here. The question is, could you give a hypothetical estimate from start to finish of a 1-bedroom, 1.5 bath? So I'm going to say, I mean, Joe and Ryan, if you guys want to tackle that, you certainly can, but that it's hard to know what the total square footage is there, and where it's located, and what some of the other variables are. So, you know, geographic location for a home is a very critical thing to know in terms of estimating cost.
Is it an ADU or a principal residence?
Yeah, complexity of the site is really important to understand. Site costs are high, so it's a big portion of the overall build. So I would say, Kathleen, thank you for posing that question. I think probably to address that question best, it would be good to have a separate conversation with Jay, so that we can really address it within the context of some more information.
And I'm happy to do so. One of the other questions that we had from Dennis is on ways to save money. And, you know, I think the idea that we just spoke about, you know, the owners taking on some of the projects themselves is obviously one way to do that. Are there other ways that you or guys are seeing on site that allows a client to save a bit of money here and there, or you know, a larger chunk of money that they might be able to see savings on? I know, for instance, I know, Joe, on the house that you just finished, they didn't do a garage, correct? You know, and what we're hearing is garages can cost up to 75 grand right now for a 2-car standard garage. What are some other ways you might see that they could save a chunk of money on a building project at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a wide variety of ways to sort of stage a job, the garage being an obvious one, but decks and porches, you know, any attachment to the garage, finished basements. That house we also put, you know, we plumbed for future bathroom under the slab, but didn't put the bathroom in yet. So that's a way. Same thing with, you know, capes that maybe you don't finish the second floor, you just kind of leave it. So, you know, just to, you know, build, design and do some of the build in anticipation of future needs, but don't necessarily finish it all at once. The other thing you can do is go with really inexpensive finishes initially, you know, really inexpensive kitchen cabinets, just the knockdown stuff from Home Depot that maybe you put in yourself, or even you have your contractor do it, and then later on do, you know, the kitchen of your dream, or you know, so things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point on the finishes, Joe. Certainly, because the shape of the house, generally speaking, the shape of the house, people aren't going to change, but certainly kitchen cabinets and that kind of stuff. Basically, you know, for me, it's anything you can take off of the plate for the on-site. For me, really, the cost benefit of modular is getting as much done in the factory. So anything that you can take off the site end of the work, that's where the majority of our time, you know, from a build perspective, the majority of our time and cost is associated with all the ancillary stuff that has to happen on site. So whatever you can reduce from that, I think, is substantial cost savings, generally speaking. The garage obviously is one of the obvious things to leave off as part of the initial part of the construction. So
Great. Another live question that just came in that refers back a little bit to what we were talking about initially, from Catherine. With so much planning ahead needed, what are your thoughts about initiating site work, septic, etc.? And I presume the question is posed from the standpoint of initiating it independent of the build, so that the client is initiating that work on their own, finding local entities to start that process. Assuming that's the way that it is meant to be framed, what do you both think?
I similar to what Joe said earlier, you know, obviously conversations up front and how that's gonna interact, and if it is in fact you know, the homeowner taking on some of those responsibilities. I mean, you want to make sure that things are figured out and planned through very good conversations. But if you're talking about initiating, you know, if I were your builder and I was going to initiate some of the site stuff early ahead of some things, again, you want to have really good conversations. But quite honestly, I'm doing that with our next 2 BrightBuilt jobs. I have some opportunity that I think I can get ahead of things if I do that stuff this fall, and both those builds are going to be spring builds. I think, you know, that for us in particular, we do our own site work, so that gets us quite a bit ahead of the game. If I can go, you know, if I've got some spare time this fall, if you know, spare time, what is spare time? But if I've got an opportunity where I can go over and I can put a driveway in preparation for things, and then I don't have to deal with the driveway situations that you get into in the spring with mud and all that other stuff, then it's a very good approach. But it's all pending good conversations and discussions, and making sure logistics are figured out. But it's going to work well, I think, on those 2 projects in particular for us. So getting ahead on those things is a good idea. That one of those in particular was one of the sites that I have pre-scheduled the well and want to get that done and out of the equation. So.
Yeah, I guess I would only add to that, echoing much of what Ryan said, but I always tell my clients, you know, don't pick up a hammer, don't let us pick up a hammer until all of the design, or at least as much of the design, is done as possible. Because, yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a ridiculous example, but you put a septic system in without fully thinking through things, and all of a sudden in the design process, it makes all the sense in the world to add another bedroom, which is going to change your septic requirements. And, you know, now you're kind of stuck. So that's the only caveat I would add.
I think in a lot of conversations I've been having with people on the phone is that the 2 biggest variables on a typical build are that site work that we've been speaking about and the finish levels. So to your guys' point, knowing a few of those costs up front will help people understand their budget a little bit better. I think that people are quite interested in knowing what their site work is going to cost to roll it into the build, specifically because not 2 sites, even if they're right next to each other, are comparable. To Ryan's point earlier, if one already has a well on it, you're 26 weeks ahead of it, you know, that second site. So I think these are good discussion points around the variableness of some of the builds that we're experiencing these days. I'm going to jump to another question if I can, Parlin, since we just talked about a little diamond with Joe, and folks are interested, especially Judy Brown is interested in the average cost per square foot of that little diamond. Do you have a sense of what that was on the post build, Joe?
It was about $445 all in per square foot.
And that's without a garage.
That is without a garage, yes.
Right, and without land. I have to say that sometimes because people are always interested in that. So, you know, the idea of going and purchasing a lot, understanding the cart before the horse type of scenario, and getting comfortable with the numbers per square foot before you purchase a specific lot for a set amount. I think what we're seeing is in the 450 to 5 range on little diamonds right now, and on most builds in the 450 range, maybe a little bit more in some cases, right, Parlin?
Yeah, you know, as with all things, it depends on how the arithmetic works out. Obviously, smaller footprint homes are going to skew to higher cost per square foot numbers, but of course, lower all-in sums for the project. So a cost per square foot figure can be a dangerous thing to wield because it is so dependent upon the various variables that are at play in the project, as Jay's saying, whether it's the size of the home or the conditions on site or the finishes, or in many cases. So in BrightBuilt generally speaks to cost per square foot numbers as all-in turnkey numbers. So we are including all of the site work, we're including those finishes, we're including any exterior elements such as garages, screen porches. So if you see a number for a given project, or we prepare a ballpark just as a point of reference, those costs per square foot always reflect the full scope of the project, which does change from project to project. So there may be some cases where it's 400 a square foot. There may be somewhere it's 500 square foot for essentially the same design. And that's due to those other variables of finishes, site conditions, and external structures. The other thing I will also recommend is that if in talking to other builders or talking to other entities out there, if you're looking around at different options, make sure you fully understand what their cost per square foot reflects. There are many builders who quote, because it's how they do it and because it makes sense, not for good or bad, but it's just important to understand from an apples to apples standpoint. Many builders quote their cost per square foot without the site work included, or without, garages, et cetera. So they're talking about just the house. So just ensure that if you're shopping around or if you're looking at other options, you have a clear sense of what exactly that number reflects when it gets quoted. To that point, we've sort of been touching a little bit lightly on the cost of land and site work. There have been a number of questions posed both live and in the upfront form regarding how to find and purchase land. That obviously is a pretty deep discussion in and of itself. We in fact do actually have a separate webinar for that that addresses that particular topic that we hosted earlier this winter. So we can perhaps recirculate that webinar link as well to the attendees today. But the short answer to that question is, if you can find land that has access from the north, so therefore the backyard orients to the south, and that doesn't have a lot of ledge, which sometimes is hard to determine at the outset, which doesn't require a ton of clearing, harder and harder to find, and also that either has access to utilities or already has them installed, that is, in my mind, an optimal lot. That said, maybe, to Jay's point, talking to some local subcontractors, if you're looking at a piece of land and you're not sure about some of those variables, maybe ask for some quotes, ask for some estimates on what it would cost to put in an 800-foot driveway or a 200-foot driveway or a 40-foot driveway. Understand what exactly that driveway is. Is it gravel or is it asphalt? What are you expecting? And make sure that you're aligned with what estimate is being prepared. So, lots of variables at play with finding land, but I'm going to refer both to that webinar and just keep it succinct to cover a number of the questions that came in on how to approach the purchase of land. And Jay, I know you have a good metric for what portion or what proportion of the overall spend you should expect that cost of land to be. So let's say you have a $600,000 overall budget. You probably don't want to be spending $300,000 on land. If you want to refer to that real quick.
Well, I don't know if it's a great metric, but the idea being your home should cost 2.5 to 3 times what your land costs. So a lot of times I'll have someone, I'm speaking to, and they bought a lot that costs $500,000 and they want to try to put a $500,000 home on it. The idea being you're not really doing that lot justice. So you might want to try to extend that budget somewhat. I was thinking about another way to save, and Joe touched on it a little bit, but I'm interested in what these guys have to say about the idea of going down and not up. So for instance, building a ranch with a walkout basement versus building something with a second floor. What type of savings could you imagine someone getting and doing something like that versus, as I mentioned, going up instead of going down instead of up.
I think it depends, with careful planning, we did that. The first house we built, it was not a BrightBuilt, it was stick built. We built into a hill and it was a walkout, but just because the way the design was done and what we had to do to carry parts of the second floor framing, because it was actually then 3 stories, it was not, and the savings were not what I was hoping they would be. So I think if you can get a living space out of the first floor that's pleasant and livable and at least light on one side, and you deal with all your moisture issues very carefully, I do think that is at least potentially. I don't know, Ryan, if you have any more experience with the particulars of that.
Yeah, I hate to keep answering questions with kind of what ifs, but obviously there's a lot of variables there that they're challenging. I think the general rule is basement space is kind of always been considered like low cost space, right? You're doing it anyways and it's there and you just have to do things correctly. And there's a lot of truth to that, but again, it's all in variables. The site, as Parlin mentioned, going back to the previous webinar, site evaluation up front is a big part of that equation. I mean, obviously you need the right piece of land to have a daylight basement. But then a lot of the times that right piece of land that has nice slope to it, that usually comes along with rock. So, and ledge. So you can have those types of variables. I would say, yeah, it's a challenging question. We've got an island build coming up that's a 3-story home that's taking advantage of, I think, probably the cost effectiveness of modular and stacking and going vertical, which I think in that scenario is absolutely cost effective. But that also has to do with the land in their scenario in particular. They literally are using every square footage almost of their setback allowances on that property. So part of that was driven by the fact they just couldn't go out any further. If they wanted square footage, we had to go up. So again, I don't think that's really answering the question, but it really has to do with variables, right or wrong.
That's good.
This next question is it sticks in this theme of what we're talking about in terms of site costs, etc. From Valerie. What percentage of total cost is allocated for infrastructure, i.e. driveway, well, septic, etc. in your proposals? So I think broad strokes, what portion of an overall cost of build would you estimate is generally for site? And of course, it does change. It does vary from project to project, but if you could come up with, kind of a range of what you typically see for percentage of overall cost, that'd be helpful to know.
I'm actually thinking about that question in my head right now, like an actual percentage. It seems to me you're probably somewhere in the 25% range. Foundation, well, septic. But again, loaded question. I could very quickly break. I've got numbers in my head that I kind of always just use to process. And again, completely dependent on where you are. Joe in Western Mass is going to be a completely different situation than myself, but an average size septic systems, I usually figure in my head 12 to 15,000. A well is $15,000, and a foundation for a typical foundation for a square house, $20,000, 25, maybe $30,000. So, there's 50,000 in those elements.
And then that's, that's still, you've still got the site clearing, you've got the actual excavation for the,
Yep.
for the work of the footprint of the house. And I have seen septic systems in more complex installations costing upwards of 65 to 70,000. So it's important to note that, what Ryan's
Yep.
referring to is a very straightforward, great soils, great drainage, gravity fed septic system, which there are in abundance in various areas. And if you're lucky and you've got the right soils conditions, you can build a septic system along those lines. But I've also seen quotes in the 60 to 80,000 range for septic alone.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
But yeah, what do you think, Joe? Do you have a number in mind for either a percentage or?
It's funny, when you first asked the question, I felt we should be like on the newlywed game. We write our answers down and see. Ryan and I are getting a divorce. We couldn't agree.
That's fun. Good idea.
I was going to say like 10 to 20%, but I think those differences, it's the devil's in the details. It just,
Yep.
it really does depend. But kind of going back to the land question, that is something to pay if you're looking at a piece of land. The value you might get out of hiring, a soil engineer to come in, or a septic engineer, whatever, to really evaluate it for something like a septic system, because as Parlin mentioned, that can be a huge variable depending on soil content. I'm just a whole bunch of factors, and you might be able to determine a good deal of that beforehand. And realtors can be, how should we say,
Optimistic
about yes, what it's going to take to put a septic on a piece of property. So I think a little due diligence on buyer's part in that respect is, might be a really smart thing to do.
Yeah.
I can jump in here if you like, Carl.
Mhm.
Cameron's asking, and it kind of comes to the point we made earlier with material costs and talent on site. But the question is, do you see any benefit in holding off right now, given the fluctuating material costs, supply chain issues, and skilled worker shortages? And if yes, do you foresee things starting to improve? Is there a window? Is it 18 to 24 months? Anything that you guys are seeing on the ground that might help dictate when a project launches or doesn't launch?
I personally rely on experts to tell me things like that, because I'm not the financial guy. I'm a builder, and I know how to put things together. Dave Ramsey says if you're in a position right now to build, if anybody knows who Dave Ramsey is, financial expert, if you're in a position financially to build, then build. Don't wait. Who knows? I'll say, if you walk into Home Depot or Lowe's and look at some of the very obvious commodity material items, I'm a builder, and I look at materials all day long. And the first thing I do every time I walk into a Lowe's or Home Depot is I look at the stack of 7/16 OSB that's right at the door. And that's my dictator on material costs. That has gone down in my experience in the last 5 years. That's gone down to $8 a sheet, and it's gone up to $55 a sheet. It's actually very reasonable right now, and so is the lower end dimensional lumber. But as we off camera talked about earlier, futures, there's some things that dictate. You can't just rely on the cost as you walk into Home Depot on what you're going to get from a manufacturer currently. But I've always been kind of a believer of that. If you're in a position to do it, and you are in a position to have a home right now, then I would just move forward. My personal opinion.
What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add to that. I agree. I'm also not a financial person.
Yeah.
But I do. My wife actually is. And when I say, commodities has got to come down, she makes the valid point that when these kinds of leaps happen, they don't tend to come down. Even when there's very specific reasons you can point to why there was this jump. Once the market absorbs that pricing, it
Mhm.
tends to be a done deal. So
Yeah. Yeah, there are some builders within our network who have a fairly firm belief that if we're at 450 a square foot now, we might be at 600 in 2 years. So, so the general consensus appears to be that building now is a good thing to do. But on the same token, we've all been trying to look through crystal balls for the last 2 years, and nobody has been able to anticipate or predict where we are today. And we are in a very different place today than we were 2 years ago. So, so nobody has certainty, unfortunately, and even the experts don't have a really clear picture of what's to come. But the consensus appears to be, if you can do it now, might be better than 2 years from now. So actually, the next question does ask, how do current economic conditions have impacted the costs of a BrightBuilt home pre-pandemic to current? And just briefly to touch on that, yeah, we've seen prices go from 250 to 325, I think is roughly what we were quoting per square foot just over 2 years ago pre-pandemic, to 450 to 5 today. So it's been a substantial increase, and that's, you know, that's not specific to BrightBuilt. That is universal across the board with all construction costs right now. At least the percentage increase is universal. The actual cost per square foot is going to vary from place to place.
I think generally speaking, you could say it's risen 30% in the last 15 to 18 months.
I would even say 30% in the last 4 to 5 months. And, you know, overall in the last 2 years, close to 50%. It seems to be kind of the trend that we've seen. Just to only saying that, not to correct Jay, but to clarify the short-term impact that can be had sometimes, as we've seen due to fuel price increases just in these last 3 to 4 months. So we had the COVID-related and supply chain-related trends that were impacting costs. And just in these last 3 to 4 months now, we've had fuel-related costs. So, yeah, I mean, I can tell you everyone in the industry would love for things to stabilize and calm down a bit. But there are variables that are external factors that have been hard to anticipate. I just posed that question, Jay, so I don't know if you want to kick off with another one.
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about the increases due to inflation, which you just kind of hit upon there. Here's someone with a kind of a softball for us: is what is the roof pitch of a little diamond? They're looking for a 10-12 for the heavy snow in the New York State. So I'll throw that one out there.
Well, the as designed pitch is 12-12, but we can certainly reduce to 10-12 with no problem. So that's a quick and easy. I'm going to bounce actually to this other one that was just posed live. And I think all of us probably have an answer for it, but I'll put it to Joe and Ryan specifically. Is all electric and EV really becoming a trend? Joe, what would you say to that?
My sense, it certainly is, just with my own clients, but also just in the overall cultural awareness that you know, anything to decarbonize things is all good, and you get there by going all electric. So yes, I think it is and should be. If I may pontificate.
I'd agree.
Okay, great. I think a lot of our questions are sort of drawn from similar themes. So we've been addressing a lot of the other questions through the discussion. One was just posed live that we actually addressed earlier in the conversation. So maybe if in rewatching the webinar, we can get that question answered to that individual, that might be
Another
useful.
question is if folks can get in and see a BrightBuilt home. And to that point, we just had an open house a few weeks ago in the home that Joe just finished in Great Barrington. So we're trying to get back into it. That was the first open house that we've had in 2 years. I think it was fairly successful, and a lot of folks drive a decent way to get there. So we're currently looking for some other homes to open up to folks. So stay tuned, and if you're on our newsletter, you'll get the first inkling that's happening again. There's also a few questions about ADUs, Parlin. Anything we want to jump on as far as that goes? For instance, what's the average site prep and cost, utility cost for an ADU? So an actual additional dwelling unit that's going to fit in the back of someone's yard. Ryan, do you have a sense of, maybe what those costs might be? I mean, obviously there's so many variables, but we're getting ready to do more and more of those as we move forward.
Yeah, I've got a sense of the cost. We've gone through as partners with BrightBuilt, we've gone through the pricing end of things as far as the ADUs go. So, you guys might have. I don't want to step on any pricing toes, but do you guys have the? So we're what? 200 to 250,000. Does that sound right? All in for ADU pricing. And that is a fairly standard design right now of 15 feet by 32.
And that does, just to, again, give a little bit more context to that, that does assume fairly straightforward tie-ins to all existing utilities. So that's not a raw site that would require a septic and a well and clearing and those other factors. That is purely tying into existing infrastructure.
Yep.
Here's a question actually that's a good piggyback to that. Are ADUs part of the approved number of bedrooms per septic system size or not? In other words, if we add a 2-bedroom ADU, do we need to increase the septic system size?
Yes.
Everybody is universally nodding. Yes, yes. Any addition of any bedroom, whether it's in the addition of an interior of a home or to the exterior, would warrant a septic size that's sized accordingly. And it's a great question in terms of the planning and preparation. If you are on a site that you want to put an ADU on and you are working with an existing septic or well, those are 2 factors you'll want to look into. Is your septic currently sized for the number of bedrooms you're looking to have in total? And is the well flow rate sufficient for supporting additional plumbing fixtures? So questions that the contractors or subcontractors can assist you with determining, but things worth looking into if you're looking at installing an ADU. I'm going to take just a half second to address some of the design specific questions that were posed both ahead of time and today. There were some questions about whether something is possible, such as changing roof pitches or swapping out designs. So we have a Cushing and an Appledore, and if you're familiar with both of those designs, they're fairly similar in footprint. The question was, can an Appledore second floor be done on a Cushing or a Cushing first floor done for an Appledore? And the answer is yes, definitely. So in many cases, any of our pre-existing designs can incorporate features from other designs that are well liked, and or the internal layout of any design can be adjusted. So just to quickly address some of those questions that have been posed. And I think actually we've generally addressed a number of questions that were posed ahead of time. I believe we've addressed everything that was posed live. If your question was not addressed specifically, and or if you have an additional question, well, if your question was not addressed specifically, we will get back to you individually after this webinar as part of the package of the webinar recording that we'll be sending around. If you have an additional question, do feel free to pose them directly to myself or to Jay. If it's beyond what we know from the conversations we've had with general contractors, we can certainly forward them on to Joe and Ryan for their insights as well. So as we're coming to the end of the hour here, I just wanted to offer a quick moment. If Ryan or Joe, if either of you have thought of things you wanted to add before we close, just wanted to give you a moment to say any closing remarks.
I think I'm done.
Okay,
So
great.
I-
Well, thank you both so much for joining us and for being present today and able to field these questions. We know there's a lot of questions being asked right now, so it's great to be able to address them. Jay, did you have anything to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I think this speaks to the power of a team and bringing together a team to understand some of these variables as you go through a design. So getting your design started allows us to pull that team together in order to get to a number that you're going to be comfortable building with. So certainly appreciate these two being here, and I know that they're busy guys, and we appreciate all of you all taking the time to be here as well.
Thank you all, and you will see a recording hopefully within the next week. So feel free to circle back, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice.
Everybody, take care.